Hello everyone. Please adopt a comfortable position and relax. What follows is all about discovery and ancient wisdom. Tonight we are going to explore the creation myth of different cultures, different traditions from Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. The creation myth or creation stories, that is to say, the symbolic narratives of how the world began and how people first came to inhabit it. Each one is unique, even though you will notice similarities sometimes between them, and each one is way more than a story to the societies that produced them. They conveyed, or they still convey, profound truth, if not literally, because most of the time they are not regarded as history by the believers, at least metaphorically or symbolically. Truth about the nature of the world, our position within it, what we are, and where we come from. You can easily navigate between the stories using the timestamps in the first comment under the video, and in it you will also find the links to audio streaming platforms like Spotify or Apple Music if you would like to listen to my stories there, and a link to my Patreon page where your support is always welcome. It keeps this channel going without ad breaks before, during or after videos, and you can download audios and videos, get audio versions with background sound effects, listen to everything as podcasts, get updates about what's coming up, vote in surveys, and easily send me suggestions for future topics. And now let's begin our journey with the first stop. At the beginning of times, the world was nothing like we know it now. There was only a chaotic mass full of seeds floating in the void. No one knows how long this lasted, as no being, God, spirit, or human, was there to see it. But it happened gradually that the finer parts of this mass went up, because they were lighter, and the heavier parts went down. The lighter seeds formed heaven, light, translucent, and full of yin energy. The heavier seeds became earth, heavy, opaque, and full of yang energy. The world had appeared, and between these two dimensions of earth and heaven, the tension gave birth to deities. 3 ancestral gods appeared, followed by others. These were in equal parts the products of earth and heaven, and so they were not male nor female. But after several more generations of gods, they began to dissociate between males and females, and they formed couples. At the time, gods went into hiding after their creation, and they didn't try to transform this world they were born from. To this day, these first generations of gods have never reappeared, and no one knows whether they keep watching the world or have fallen into an eternal sleep. After 3 generations of ancestral gods and 4 generations of male and female divine pairs, arrived the 5th couple. The god Izanagi, he who invites, and the goddess Izanami, she who invites. They stood on a floating bridge between earth and heaven, and they received the divine spear, superbly ornamented with jewels, that they used to stir the ocean under their feet. It happened that when the spear was pulled up, the brine dripping from the tip became solid and formed an island, the island of Onogoro. Izanagi and Izanami descended to this island and discovered what their predecessors ignored. They could create, they could shape the world, and they could procreate. Together they produced 8 new islands, the islands that made up Japan. And they procreated. Soon, Izanami's belly became round, and they expected the first being in the world created by sexuality, rather than born from the forces of the world. But Izanami was pregnant with a dangerous entity, the god of fire. When she gave birth, her son burned her, and she died in the arms of Izanagi. Raging with pain and anger, Izanagi attacked the newborn, and from the blood of the baby god of fire, more gods were born, such as the god of thunder. Meanwhile, Izanami on her deathbed also gave birth to more gods, each of them associated with a principle or a natural phenomenon like agriculture, earth and metal. And in this terrible moment of death, pain and loss, new divine life multiplied, and the world kept evolving, becoming ever more diverse and populated. The new gods scattered around this world that they were discovering, and Izanagi was left alone to his grief. But all hope had not been entirely lost. Death was only a passage, and Izanami had not disappeared. She had only descended to Yomi, the underworld where the dead resided. Izanagi resolved to go search for her and bring her back to the world of the living. He found an entrance to the underworld and descended to the dark and cold universe of Yomi that the light from heaven never illuminated. After a lengthy search, he found Izanami, weak, lying on the ground. He tried to take her in his arms and asked her to come back with him to the land of the living. But the goddess did not let him come close, and she replied that it was now too late. She belonged to Yomi, to the land of the dead, and there was no coming back, because she had already eaten food cooked in the underworld. Izanagi looked at her from closer, and despite the darkness, he could see that her beautiful face had now turned into a horrible death mask, and her body was infested with maggots. There was no return from the decay of death, and even the love they once shared could not defeat it. With sadness and anger, she chased him from the underworld. All feelings of care and love between them had vanished. His enemy was now humiliation and anger only, whereas Izanagi was filled with fear and repulsion. When he reached the upper world of Earth, he moved an enormous stone to block the entrance, so that the horrifying creatures from Yomi would not be able to cross between worlds. From the other side of the rock, trapped underground and angrier than ever, his enemy threatened him and declared that she would now kill 1,000 people every day. Izanagi replied that if this had to be, then he would father 1,500 children every day, so that the living could still be able to grow and multiply despite her curse. This is the story of the Dineta, the homeland, which is where the Navajo live, but not the only world to ever have existed. Our world is actually the fourth and final world, and many things happened before the first men arrived here, many, many generations ago. It all began with the first world. The first world was small and simple. It was entirely black and made of 4 different seas. And where these seas met, there was a single island where a single pine tree grew. The only inhabitants of this first world were the air spirit people, ants, beetles, dragonflies, locusts and bats. No one ever knew whether this world existed for an eternity, or maybe just a heartbeat. But it happened that a cloud formed above each of the 4 seas. There was a black cloud, a white cloud, a yellow cloud, and a blue cloud, and a wind began to blow. The blue and the yellow cloud came together in the west, and as they mixed, a first woman was formed. At the same time, the black and the white cloud came together in the east, and as they mixed, first man appeared. Each of them had appeared with a stone. From the blue and the yellow cloud, a turquoise had formed, and it was owned by the woman. From the white and black clouds, a crystal had also formed, and it was owned by the man. Using their stones, each of them made a fire in their respective corner of this small, dark world. And for the first time, light appeared. This light was the awakening of the mind. For the first time in this dark world, thoughts and feelings came into existence. As the clouds rose higher in the sky, first man and first woman saw each other's fires in the distance. They were intrigued, and they searched for each other, guided by the light, and they met. They decided to stay together in this world, where everything complemented something else. But this harmony didn't last. Another being, a great coyote, formed in the water of the four seas and appeared near them. He declared that he knew everything, everything that was under the water and in the sky, and that he owned knowledge. And yet a fourth being soon appeared, another coyote named First Hungry, who declared he was older than the other three and knew witchcraft. The four of them began to argue, bringing disharmony into the world, and like a plague, disharmony extended to the air spirit people, the ants, the beetles, the fireflies, the locusts, and the bats. They also became jealous of each other and began to fight. The island at the center of the four seas had turned to chaos and war. The spirits of the four seas could stand it no more and demanded all these beings to leave their world. There was an opening in the sky, in the east, and flying or climbing, all the inhabitants of the first world escaped. They crawled through the passage in the sky and left the first world, the dark world, forever. The insects, the man, the woman, and the two coyotes entered the second world. The second world was as blue as the first was dark. The newcomers began to explore it, and they found blue plains, blue rivers, and blue mountains. And finally they found inhabitants. There were bluebirds, blue hawks, blue jays, and many blue furry animals. But the masters of the second world were the swallow people, all birds, who welcomed the newcomers to share their world, where harmony ruled. It was decided that air spirit people and swallow people would live together as a single tribe. And first man, first woman, and the two coyotes were also allowed to stay with them. For 23 days, they all lived together and treated each other as members of the same tribe. But on the 24th day, one of the air spirit people approached the wife of the swallow people's chief and asked to sleep with her. The wife accepted, and on the following day, her husband found out. He complained that the foreigners had been treated as equals and with kindness, but had been ungrateful and treacherous. Even though they had been given a second chance, these air spirit people were still not living in balance and harmony. And so they had to leave this world. Like in the first world, sides appeared, fights ensued, and the offended swallow chief demanded all that did not belong to this world to leave it. There was an opening in the sky to the south, and the air spirit people, the man, the woman, the coyotes, and the blue beings who disagreed passed through it. They went to the third world. The third world was as yellow as the second world was blue. The third world teemed with life. There were animals they had never seen before, like antelopes, deers, turkeys, and squirrels. It also had two rivers that crossed in its center, and in its corners were sacred mountains. In the east was the white Dogon mountain, in the south the blue turquoise mountain, and there were also a yellow and a black mountain. On these mountains lived 4 holy people who were immortal, one on each mountain. The third world was welcoming, and the refugees from the first and the second world settled there, happy for this new opportunity to begin a new life. First man and first woman built a hut and settled near the place where the rivers crossed. The 4 holy people tolerated the newcomers into their world, and one day they visited the man and the woman. They asked them to cleanse themselves because they would soon return. The two obeyed and bathed carefully. When the holy people returned, they performed a ritual that transformed first man and first woman. Until then, they had been spirit people who were born from nature in the first world. They were an essence, a potential that had not yet taken material shape. The ritual transformed them into human beings with great powers. The holy people instructed them to now live as husband and wife, to explore their new flesh and reproduce. And they did. The man and the woman had several pairs of twins, and time passed in the third world. They learned weaving from 2 creatures that also lived near the crossing of the rivers, Spider-Woman and Spider-Man. Their children, and then their children's children, formed a village where they all lived in balance and harmony. Until one day, when first woman complained that while men went hunting or making tools, women did all the work. They gathered the food and tended to the fields. They could live without men for sure. First man grew angry and called all the other men. He told them that the women thought they could live without them, and that it was time to show them they would be miserable without men. And so the men decided to go live on the other side of the river. With everything they had invented and made, the axes, the hoes. For 4 years, men and women lived separated and increasingly unhappy. Each side survived, but they had less food, more work to do. The men lacked new clothes, the women lacked meat, and they all longed for each other. A reconciliation finally happened between first man and first woman, and the 2 sides reunited. All women had crossed on a raft, all but a mother and her 2 daughters. When they tried to cross swimming, the spirit of the river captured them and took them to his house under the waters, where they would keep company to his own children. The humans soon realized that the 2 girls were missing, and they began to look for them. After a long search, which gave no results, they concluded that these girls had to be kept prisoner under the river, and so they swam there to retrieve them. Under the waters, they found the house of the spirit of the river and the girls inside. But they were accompanied by First Angry, the coyote, who had introduced anger and witchcraft to the world. First Angry took the children of the spirit of the river with him, stealing them. The men didn't know that, and they began celebrating because the lost girls were returned. But on the following day, when they all woke up, they saw all sorts of animals running in panic in every direction. The black insects and bats from the first world, the bluebirds and furry animals of the second world, and the antelopes, the deers or the squirrels from the third world. They announced that a wall of water was coming from all corners of the world. The wrath of the river spirit would soon submerge the yellow world under a flood. They all ran to the mountains where lived the holy people to ask for help. One of them, Turquoise Boy, on the Blue Mountain, gave First Man a reed and told him to plant it. So it was done. The reed was planted on the top of the mountain, and it grew quickly to the sky, where there was an opening. All people from the three worlds, the humans and the holy people, they all climbed to escape the tide that would soon submerge everything. And they arrived in the fourth world, the white world. The refugees had arrived in the middle of a lake, in a world populated by beasts. But they arrived to this world with all the experience and knowledge they had acquired in the previous worlds. It was decided that this new world would be shaped by the holy people, and first man and first woman. They would recreate the mountains from the third world with soil, and they would add the colors they had known along their journey. In this world, they would also add the sun, the moon, the stars, and the seasons, modeling the white world into the world we know today. But it was not only wisdom and balance they had brought with them. First Hungry, the coyote, had crossed to the fourth world too, and they ran into problems because of him. First Hungry resented the men and the holy people for not including him into their plans. And so, with the jealous and chaotic nature that he was born with, he tried to derail their plans. The truth is that no one trusted him, and so he was not informed of their projects for the world. And this is the reason why he decided to ruin them as much as he could. When the patterns of the sun, the moon, the night, the day, and the seasons had been designed, they were perfectly harmonious. Day and night would mark the time for work, life, rest, and sleep. The seasons would permit to know when to plant food and harvest. And the harmony of celestial bodies would help keep harmony like a mirror between beings in the world. The coyote could not destroy all this creation, but he could spoil it. He disrupted the paths of the sun and the paths of the moon, so that instead of being synchronized, the 12 months of the sun would be 13 months of the moon. He disrupted the seasons, so that sometimes frost would come early and sometimes remain late. Sometimes the rains would come, sometimes not, and all the creatures of the world would be at the mercy of whimsical weather. There would never be absolute peace, certainty, and harmony in human lives. Their harvest would never be guaranteed. Coyote was also responsible for the fact that true death came into existence in the world. One day, he threw a stone into a lake and declared that if it sank, then the dead would go back to the previous world and never exist again in our world. Of course, the stone sank, and death became the fate of every living being. The people were mad at him for what he had done, and they went to find him with the intention to beat him. But he spoke and said that he had actually saved the world, because it would soon have been overpopulated and unlivable if no one ever disappeared. It was only fair that generations would not exist all at the same time. The people had to admit that there was some wisdom in this, and they understood that the world could not be just a fixed and perfectly still harmony. Otherwise there could be no life. Instability, unpredictability, and even death were maybe part of a greater balance, and of this greater balance that made our world first angry the coyote that some would be inclined to call evil or chaos was maybe a necessary part. Once humanity and the creatures from all the four worlds that had all arrived in the fourth world had settled, the time when history would begin had arrived. Before there was any living creature, or even plants, soil or sky, there was only a gaping abyss, an expanse of darkness and void that existed between Niflheim, the homeland of ice, and Muspelheim, the homeland of fire. This lasted eons, that no one existed to record. But it happened that frost from Niflheim and flames from Muspelheim crept towards each other and met in the middle of the abyss. The meeting of these elemental principles set the creation of the world in motion. The fire melted the ice, and the drops formed themselves into Ymir, the first giant. Ymir was a gigantic creature, and was hermaphrodite. It could reproduce without anyone else. When he slept in the void of the abyss that now had its first resident, other giants appeared, all born from Ymir's body. As the frost continued to melt, a second creature was born from the drops, a cow. She nourished Ymir with her milk, and nourished herself by licking the ice that contained salt. Her licks slowly uncovered another creature that was prisoner of the ice, Buri, Odin's grandfather, and the first of the Aesir gods. Buri had a son, who married a female giant, a daughter of Ymir, the primordial giant, and together they had 3 children, Odin and his 2 brothers, all half-giant and half-god. Odin and his brothers slew Ymir, and from his corpse they constructed the world. They formed oceans from his blood, soil from his skin, vegetation from his hair, the sky from his skull. And on this new world, the first spring began. Some time later, the gods formed the first man and the first woman from tree trunks, and humanity began to multiply. But many giants had appeared from Ymir's body before the first giant died. Giants had multiplied, and their chaotic nature threatened to destroy this new world, Midgard. So in order to protect it, the gods built a fence around it, using Ymir's eyebrows, so that this new world would thrive, at least for now, because everything that begins needs to end, and the end of times would eventually happen. Long ago, before there were any people in the world, all life existed only in the sky. Olodumare, the all-encompassing being who has no limit, no gender, and all power, lived in the sky. And with Olodumare lived many, many Orishas. They all lived around a young baobab tree. The Orishas could find everything they needed for their lives within their reach, and in fact they all wore beautiful clothes and gold jewelry. Olodumare told them that the entire sky was theirs to explore, but all the Orishas were content to stay near the baobab tree and uninterested in exploring their world. All but one. This curious Orisha was Obatala. Like all Orishas, male and female, he had certain powers, but he wanted to put them to use instead of just living blissfully by the baobab tree. Obatala was the singular Orisha that would bring changes to the world. As he pondered what to do, he looked far down through the mists below the sky. And as he looked and descended as much as he could to see better, he began to realize that there was a vast, empty ocean below the mist. An immense expanse of water, with no earth. There were no islands, no coastlines, and even less life in it. Obatala went to Olodumare and asked to let him make something solid in the waters below. This way there could be beings that himself and the other Orishas could help with their powers, giving them a purpose. Olodumare was touched by Obatala's desire to do something constructive and creative, instead of just enjoying a purposeless life around the baobab tree. And so the Supreme Being agreed to send Obatala to the watery world below. Obatala had to prepare for his mission. He went to Orumila, the Orisha who could know the future, and he asked Orumila what he should bring along. Orumila used his powers to see the threads of the future. He sprinkled powder of baobab roots on a sacred tray and observed the patterns, repeating the operation 8 times until he had sufficient vision of what the future could be like. And finally he told Obatala to prepare a long chain of gold and to gather sand as much as he could, and also palm nuts and maize and all the seeds he could find. And finally, to bring along the sacred egg that carried the personalities of all the Orishas, that secret egg was kept between the roots of the baobab tree. Obatala went to his fellow Orishas and asked them all for their gold. They all gave him all the gold they had. He took all the gold to the goldsmith of the Orishas and had the jewelry turned into a long chain that ended with a hook. He also gathered all the sand in the sky, palm nuts, maize and other seeds, everything he could find around the baobab tree, and with all this equipment, he hooked the chain into the sky and started to climb down. The watery world was very, very far from the baobab tree, and for 7 days he went down and down, until finally he reached the end of the chain. The water was just under him, but he was unsure what to do, and so he looked and listened for any clue. Finally, he heard the voice of Orumila, the seer, who could also communicate at a distance, and Orumila called him to use the sand he was carrying. Obatala poured the sand into the water below, and to his surprise, the sand solidified to make a vast, solid land. And as this vast, flat land formed, the sacred egg he was carrying suddenly cracked. From it flew a sacred bird, Sankofa, the bird bearing the spirits of all the Orishas. Sankofa multiplied into as many birds as there were Orishas, and there are more than anyone could imagine. And all the birds flew like a storm above the flat land, blowing the sand to make dunes and hills and mountains, and also plains and flatlands, giving this land character, just as the Orishas themselves have character. The diversity, the multiplicity of Orishas shaped the land into a multiplicity of landscapes. As there was now solid earth below him, Obatala let go of the chain and dropped to this new land that he called Ife, the place that divides the waters. He began to explore this world, and as he explored, he scattered the seeds he had brought, and as he walked, the seeds began to grow behind him, so that the land turned green in his wake. After walking a long time, Obatala grew thirsty, and he stopped at a small pond to drink. But as he bent over the water, he saw his reflection, and he was pleased. Orishas had no mirrors, and they never saw their reflection. They were unaware of their appearance. He took some clay from the edge of the pond and began to mold it into the shape he had seen in the reflection. He finished that one and began another and yet another, and before long he had made many of these bodies from the dark clay at the pond side. Olodumare had watched this, and he liked what Obatala had been making. So he gathered gases from the space beyond the sky and sparked them into an explosion, forming the largest fireball the world had ever seen. He sent that fireball to the land, to Ife, where it dried the lands that were still wet and began to bake the clay figures that Obatala had made. Olodumare then blew his breath of life across Ife, and the figures slowly came to life. The first people of Ife had appeared, and the saga of mankind could now begin. At first, before the world existed, there was nothing, only a primary void, a nothingness, chaos. Out of the void, after an undefined period of time, because time itself didn't exist yet, primary divine beings emerged. They were as much beings as they were essential principles, dimensions of this new world in creation. The earth, Gaia, the abyss, Tartarus, the darkness, Erebus, and love, Eros. Without male assistance, Gaia gave birth to the sky, Uranus, who then fertilized her. From the union of earth and sky, 12 beings were born, the Titans, 6 male and 6 female. After the birth of the 12th and last of the Titans, Cronus, Gaia and Uranus decided no more Titans were to be born. But their union kept producing creatures, the giant Cyclops with a single eye, or the monstrous 100-handed ones, other giants with 50 heads and 100 hands. They were all thrown into Tartarus, the abyss, by Uranus, who disowned his monstrous offspring. This made Gaia furious. She convinced her latest born, Titan Cronus, to castrate his father. He did this, and he became the ruler of the Titans. With his sister and wife, female Titan Rhea, he ruled over the other Titans, forming a court around them. Cronus' power was undisputed, but he couldn't find peace because he had betrayed his father, and he feared that his offspring would do the same. So each time Rhea gave birth, he snatched up the children and ate them. Several of their children, including Poseidon, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, were eaten this way. But Rhea hated this, and she tricked her husband when another son, Zeus, was born. She wrapped a stone in a baby's blanket, and Cronus ate the stone instead of his son. Years and years passed. Hidden from his father, Zeus became an adult and resolved to seek revenge against his murderous father. One day, Zeus poisoned Cronus' drink, which caused Titan to vomit. Cronus threw up all his children and the stone, which had been sitting in his stomach instead of Zeus for all these years. Zeus, joined by his brothers and sisters, challenged Cronus and the Titans to war for the kingship of the gods. And at last, with the help of the Cyclops that they had freed from Tartarus, the children were victorious. Cronus and the Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus. For the second time, the order of things had been turned upside down by a son betraying his father, and Zeus, who now ruled the world, with the other gods around him, had the same concern. A prophecy said that his firstborn would be a god greater than he. So when his first wife, Metis, a descendant of the first Titans, became pregnant, he swallowed her. But this didn't stop their child from being born. Goddess Athena burst forth from Zeus' head, already fully grown and dressed for war. Nevertheless, Athena was accepted among gods, and their circle expanded. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and many more were born from Zeus' siblings, or they appeared spontaneously from primordial principles. The gods lived on Mount Olympus, under the eye of Zeus, and with this new order, the first age, the age of gods, came to an end. Then began the age of gods and mortals. The world had been populated with weak creatures that had a ridiculously short lifespan, humans. Gods mingled freely with them, falling in love with humans and producing demigods or heroes. They also punished them or educated them. Demeter gave them agriculture. Hestia looked after their earth. Some of the gods' secrets were also revealed to mankind, such as fire, stolen by Prometheus, a son of the Titans, and given to men. As time passed, the gods became less interested in interfering in human affairs. They withdrew to Mount Olympus and would now only intervene punctually to help or punish, depending on their interest in mortals or just on their whims. And this is how the age of gods and mortals came to an end. A new age began, the heroic age. Heroes, sons of gods and mortals, accomplished extraordinary feats that would stay in memories for thousands of years, sometimes with the help of gods or against their will. In this new heroic age, Perseus, Theseus, Bellerophon, Heracles, Jason, Hector, Achilles, Ajax, or Odysseus explored, conquered, fought, and sometimes met their tragic fate. Before time began to exist, the world was just an endless, dark ocean, and the only sound that existed at the time was the sound of its waves. But no one could hear them, because there were no earth, no heaven, not even time. Only two beings existed and were asleep. There was a giant serpent, a cobra, that floated on the waters, and Vishnu, the Lord of creation, who was lying asleep, safe in the cobra's coils. Vishnu had been asleep forever, even though forever made no sense in a world without time. In this world, there was nothing to know, nothing to explore, nothing to wait for. But the deep sleep of Vishnu contained a promise of change, a possibility that one day something could start and replace the nothingness. This promise began to materialize. Slowly, the first sound that had ever existed, apart from the waves of the dark ocean. The first sound started. This sound had the power to fill the emptiness. It throbbed with energy, and it progressively conquered this void without limit that had always been the fabric of the universe. As the emptiness vanished and energy filled the world, the sound intensified. It became so loud that the waves of the dark ocean rose higher and higher until it became deafening, and chaos replaced this quietness that had always existed. The agitation and the loud sound woke up Vishnu. He opened his eyes and became conscious of the world and of existence. As he was awakening, a lotus flower grew from his belly button, the first flower that had ever existed. The flower opened, and right in its middle sat another being, a new one, Brahma. Vishnu told Brahma to set to work and create a world. Still sitting in the flower, Brahma calmed the wind with a glance of his eyes, and the deafening sound, that had awakened the world finally receded. Peace succeeded to chaos. Then Brahma split the lotus flower into 3 different parts. With one, he made the earth. With the second one, he made the sky. And with the last one, he made the heavens. The earth was bare, and so, following Vishnu's instructions, Brahma created more things to cover it. Grass, flowers, trees, and all the other plants. To populate it, he created living beings and let them evolve, so that the earth became full of animals, birds, fish, that lived in all sorts of different environments. This is the world we were born into. That started eons ago, when the sound Om filled the void and woke up Vishnu. This was only one of many different creation stories in the Hindu tradition. Some are connected to it and include variations. Others are completely unrelated. For example, in another creation story, life came from the cracking of an enormous primordial egg, from which all the life in the universe was born. In other stories that also involve Brahma, he didn't start creating the world following Vishnu's instructions. He existed alone, and out of loneliness split himself into 2 parts to create a male and a female that were the ancestors of all beings. Yet in other Hindu texts, it is said that nobody can know how the universe came into existence. Maybe even the gods cannot know. Or an explanation that sounds almost scientific is provided. There would be a single source of everything, from which primary elements came, and their combinations and recombinations, determined by the laws of nature, would have led to the universe as it is. There was a time when light did not exist. In the beginning, the world was covered with darkness. There was no sun and no day. The perpetually dark sky had no moon or stars. In this dark world, all manner of beasts and birds prospered. Among the beasts were many hideous monsters that did not even have a name, as well as the ancestors of beasts that still populate our world. Wolves, bears, foxes, and also much smaller beasts like beavers, rabbits, squirrels, rats and mice. And on top of that, all sorts of creeping creatures, of creeping beasts, such as lizards and snakes. There were humans too, but very few, because they could not thrive in this world. The beasts destroyed their offspring. They denied them access to the land, and so humans lived hidden, in fear, in caves that were even darker than the outside. The birds were not as ferocious and dangerous as the beasts, and as more elevated beings, they were organized. They held councils, and they obeyed to their chief, the eagle. In these ancient times, both birds and beasts had the power of speech. And for eons, the world stayed like this. The birds dominated in the dark sky. The beasts dominated on the dark earth. And a few humans survived, living in terror of being found and eaten. But one day, it happened that the birds became curious of what the world would be if there was a light in it. They wanted light admitted, and so they sent an embassy to the beasts to discuss the transformation of the world, the replacement of the darkness with light. The beasts liked the world as it was, and they refused. The agreement of birds and beasts was needed for the light to be invited. And because they could not obtain it by diplomacy, the birds resorted to war. They declared war on the beasts. The beasts were stronger. Some were enormous and apparently invincible, and others were tiny. They could hide and attack by surprise. But the eagle armed the birds with bows and arrows, so that they could attack at a distance, and they could also escape flying, or they could drop stones from above to the heads of the biggest beasts. After many days of ferocious and uncertain fight, the birds prevailed. Once the surviving beasts had accepted defeat in this war that saw many of them disappear forever, the birds could impose their decision. The light was admitted to the world, and all creatures, the birds, the beasts that had survived, and humans who emerged from their caves, for the first time, they all saw the beauty of nature and marveled at the world they lived in. Mankind could finally live in the open, and it began to prosper. But men did not forget they owed their newfound freedom to the birds, and especially their chief, the eagle. They started wearing his feathers as emblems of wisdom, justice, and power. Among human beings who lived during this era of access to the illuminated world, there was a woman who had had many children, but none of them had survived because they had been taken by the beasts. Mankind could now inhabit the surface, but men remained prey to the remaining wolves, the bears, the serpents, and the most feared of all beasts, the dragon. One day, this woman had another son, and she refused to lose him like she had lost the others. So she dug a deep cave in the ground for him to conceal her baby. And she closed the entrance and built a campfire over the spot so that her son would be kept warm and hidden from the beasts, especially from the dragon, who was very evil but also astute and constantly hungry. Every day she would remove the fire and descend into the cave to nurse her child, and then she would return to the surface and rebuild the campfire. The dragon was suspicious and always on the hunt for human children. He would frequently come and question her, asking where her children were. The only reason he did not eat her was that she could produce more babies. But the woman was brave, and despite the terror of the dragon, she never revealed the existence of her son, always swearing that she had no more children and that the dragon had already eaten all of them. Thanks to her ruse, the child could grow in his cave for several years. His mother had to let him out sometimes because he needed to play and run. She did it when the dragon was not in sight. And for several more years, her son kept growing, turning from toddler to child to adolescent. But it happened one day that the dragon saw his tracks, and this enraged the monster because he could not find the place where the boy was hidden. He threatened to kill the mother if she didn't reveal where her son was. But the woman, again, refused to give up her child. And she decided he would no longer be allowed to go out of his cave, out of fear she would lose him like the others. When she descended into the cave and told her son, the boy refused to stay underground forever, and he said that instead he would go hunting. There was no stopping him. He told his mother that living in hiding and afraid was not living, and that come what may, he would go out into the wilderness and live, hunt, breathe the air, and enjoy the light. She argued that outside there were the wolves, the bears, the serpents, and even worse, the dragon, which was already looking for him. But his decision was made. On the following day, he asked his uncle, one of the few men who populated the earth at the time, to accompany him and give him weapons so that he could hunt. The uncle made a little bow and some arrows for the boy, and the two went hunting. They found the tracks of a deer, and they followed them in the plain, across a river, in canyons, and finally up a mountain until they found their prey. The boy took his little bow and shot. This was his first success as a hunter, and they rejoiced. His uncle showed him how to prepare and cook the meat on a fire. But as they were preparing their meal, the huge form of the dragon suddenly appeared. The most feared, the most terrifying of all beasts, that never let a prey escape, had finally found them. The uncle was petrified, but maybe due to his natural bravery or his innocence, the boy was not afraid. The dragon could have eaten him on the spot, but instead, after all those years of looking for this particular boy that he had found for the first time, the dragon decided to take its time and enjoy his triumph. The dragon took the meat they were preparing and declared that he would eat the meat and then the boy. But instead of being terrified and beg for his life, as humans usually did, the boy walked to the dragon, took back the meat, and declared that this was his, and that the dragon would certainly not eat him or his uncle. The dragon was astonished at this bravery or foolishness. He didn't know which one it was, and he thought the boy was probably mad. He retook the meat, but so did the boy, and 4 times the piece of meat changed hands. Finally, the boy asked the dragon if he would fight him. The monster laughed and said yes, in whatever way the little man would like. The dragon was huge and protected by 4 coats of horn. Nothing could hurt such a monster, so he didn't worry at all that he could be defeated. The boy offered the following dual rules. They would stand at 100 steps from each other, and the dragon would be allowed to shoot 4 times at the boy with its enormous bow and arrows. If the boy survived, they would exchange places, and the little man would have 4 shots at the dragon. The dragon laughed and accepted this little game that he couldn't lose. And then he took his bow, which was made of an entire pine tree, and its quiver of arrows. Each of the arrows was a pine tree sapling, and they were 20 feet long. The dragon took aim, but the boy was small and quick. He could avoid the deadly arrow once, twice, 3 times, and finally 4 times. Then the boy said it was now his turn to shoot. The dragon was mildly annoyed that the boy was still alive, but the rules were the rules, so they exchanged places. With its 4 coats of horn, there was no risk at all that a small arrow would even scratch his skin. Hitting the huge dragon was easy, but the boy knew that his little arrows were no match for this huge, armored enemy, unless he could shoot just at the right place, near the heart and between the scales. He shot the first arrow that landed exactly where he intended, near the heart, and the dragon's outer coat of horn fell to the ground. Then a second shot destroyed the second coat, and a third also hit its target. The dragon was now trembling, because should the fourth shot hit again, it would pierce his heart, and the tiny human would win. Dragons were evil, but they were still bound by their words, and the monster was now at the boy's mercy. The boy shot for the fourth time, and the arrow pierced the dragon's heart. With a tremendous roar, the dragon rolled down the mountainside into a canyon below. The order of nature had suddenly changed. A tiny human, with agility and precision, had defeated the most powerful of beasts. Storm clouds swept the mountain, lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and rain poured. The world would never be the same again. The age of humans was beginning. This boy's name was Apache, and he was destined to become the first chief of men. Before the earth and the sky existed, when there was no day, no night, no water and no plants, no men and no animals, there was only Amma, the one God. Amma himself was not material. If anyone had been there, they still wouldn't have been able to see or touch him. Amma was pure thought, and with thoughts and signs, Amma began to trace the plan of the universe. As any action, thing, or speech is preceded by thought, Amma created 266 different signs, the same number of signs as there are days in a pregnancy. But thought and concepts advanced only through trial and error. Amma created a first universe, but this first attempt lacked the harmony and the beauty he wanted to conceive. So he unmade it, and only salvaged the four elements he had created with this first world: water, air, earth, and fire, that he liked and reused in his second attempt. To create a truly harmonious and beautiful world, Amma thought that everything should have a counterpart. He used some of the earth and the water he had created before to make small balls, and he started modeling them to create bodies and beings. He created the sun as a white pottery circled with a spiral of red copper, and its counterpart, the moon, as another white pottery circled with a spiral of white copper. He also needed a counterpart for himself, and because he lived in the sky, a world of air and fire, he conceived a partner that would live under him, a partner of earth and water, our land. This duality was harmonious, and he liked it. It was so perfect that it could create life if he fertilized the earth, and he did. But the result of this union was imperfect, because a single son was born from it, and singularity, the absence of counterpart, brought chaos. This son, Yoruba, introduced disorder into the world. He was male with no female counterpart, and this would forever disturb the harmony and threaten to undo the perfection of the Creator God's creations. Yurugu escaped and still lives among us. He is the force behind all chaotic events, from disorderly conducts in humans to natural disasters. But Amma knew that through trial and error, he could keep advancing in his creation. And so he fathered another being with his partner, the earth. And this time, he reached perfection. The earth gave birth to Nomo, an androgynous being that was at the same time male and female. Nomo served as the model for future birth. Using more earth, Amma created humans, and they were all given two souls, one male and one female, two principles corresponding to two different persons inside each human being. But Nomo also saw that the life of humans could not easily accommodate the coexistence of these two principles inside each person. And so, to overcome this duality that made life complicated, boys would become men and get rid of their female principle when reaching adulthood, whereas girls would become women and get rid of their male principle. But Yurugu, the imperfect first son, was out in the world, and it was now said that imperfection and disorder would always be a part of it. There would be forever conflicts in the heart of each individual between opposite principles, male and female, hope and fear, selfishness and altruism, violence and softness, honesty and treachery. Despite the passage to adulthood, no one can entirely get rid of this double principle that is at the heart of our beings. Perfection and harmony were the goals, the driving principles of the creation of our world, and this is why we understand them as concepts, we recognize them, and the best part of us tends to respect these principles, to be drawn to them. But our inner conflicts and the existence of Yurugu, the principle of disorder, make this perfection unreachable. However, on a larger scale, chaos and order also form a duality. Yurugu and Nomo could be seen as two opposite sides, and it is in this troubled world, but made stable by this never-ending duality, that we are called to live. Once upon a time, so long ago that the grandfathers of our grandfathers didn't live in these times, the world looked very different. There were less islands back then. Birds were invisible. Day and night were unpredictable, and sometimes the sun disappeared unexpectedly, which made farming and fishing more difficult. All the more that men had not yet discovered the secret of fire, and they had to live in complete darkness at night. The heavens were also very close to the earth, which left little room for people to live and for plants to grow. At the time, gods and mortals mingled with each other. Sometimes they fell in love and they had children. It happened one day that the moon goddess Inakawea got married with a village chief, and together they had 4 sons. The first 3 were born as normal humans, but the last of them, Maui, inherited some of his mother's divine nature. He was part human being and part god. He could shift shape and appear as a man or an animal, and far from being shy and cautious, Maui liked to use his power to play pranks, and he would ridicule anyone, man or god, who dared to displease him. He could be annoying and arrogant sometimes, but he also had a good heart and was never intentionally mean. So he was also well liked by his parents and siblings, even though his different nature made him an outcast, and he soon developed a reputation of trickster in the village. Sometimes his 3 brothers excluded him from their activities, especially their fishing expeditions. The 3 brothers were excellent fishermen, and often brought back enough fish to feed the entire village, whereas Maui was weird, and he had the reputation of being bad at fishing and bringing bad luck, so they wouldn't let him go with them on their boat. He tried everything to make them accept him, from temper tantrums to threats, until they accepted just for the sake of silencing him. And so for once, the 4 brothers one day went fishing together, Maui proudly standing at the forefront of their boat, ready to show his abilities. To put the odds on his side, he had taken with him a magical fishing hook, and as a bait he had taken also a feather from his mother's pet bird. But unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. The 4 brothers started fishing, but instead of achieving a lot of catches, as usual, they waited and waited, and nothing happened. They grew angry, and they started to blame Maui for bringing them bad luck and not delivering on the fabulous promises of abundant catch he had made. Maui had not used his magical hook yet, and that was his last card to play. So, as usual, he remained apparently confident and promised his brothers that he would make a huge catch. The 3 were skeptical, and they ordered him to stop talking and act, giving him one last chance to prove his worth. Maui casted his hook and threw the line. The magical hook fell to the ocean floor, and at first nothing happened, until suddenly Maui felt a mighty tug. Thinking he had caught a huge fish, he began to reel in his catch. But this proved very difficult, and he had to ask for help from his brothers. They were now all excited. What kind of giant fish or sea creature could resist so much? And would they be able to take it out of water? Maui ordered his 3 older brothers to paddle hard and strong to ensure a firm fishing line as he placed all his strength on reeling. The line slowly rose, but it took huge effort, and the day soon ended. The brothers stayed focused, and they kept paddling for the entire night, until the following day. The line was slowly rising and rising, but apparently their prey was still not abandoning the fight. For another entire day and an entire night, they kept drawing on the line, only focused on paddling and moving forward, until they were so exhausted that they could no longer move. And at this point, the brothers looked behind them. It was not a fish that the hook had caught. It was the ocean floor, and they had made it rise well above the sea. Several new islands, with peaks and valleys, revealed themselves. Unintentionally, and with the help of his brothers, Maui had made the bottom of the ocean rise so much that a new land had appeared. Polynesia was born. But the world was still different from what it would become. Maui had modeled it unintentionally, just by trying to prove his worth to his brothers. And on another episode, he did it again to please his mother. Hina, the goddess, liked to behave like a normal woman, and while male villagers went fishing, building, or hunting, she had her daily tasks. She wove, she cooked, and she kept her home clean and welcoming. But she complained that her workday was limited because there were few sunshine hours. The world was illuminated by La, the sun god, and La was agitated. He crossed the sky very fast and then disappeared for a long time, plunging the world into darkness. Some days he was so fast that daylight lasted only a few hours. Other times he was slower, but this was completely unpredictable, and it made the world a difficult place to inhabit. Maui wanted to help his mother, so he decided to do something about it. He took again his magical hook and wove a long and solid rope, and then he went to Aleakala, the house of the sun, the place where the sun god rested between his erratic crossings of the sky. La was powerful and burning hot, but using his powers, his hook, and acting when the sun was asleep, Maui managed to capture him, and he tied him to a tree. La begged to be released, as the god felt the need to move and could not stand staying prisoner. Maui accepted, on the condition that the god would now fly high into the heavens and would slow down his course to remain visible for as many hours as he disappeared, each day and each night until the end of times. La accepted, and since then we live in a world where night and day are regular. But the night was still very dark, so using again his hook, Maui placed the moon into the night sky. The moon would provide a softer light, and mankind would never again have to live in complete darkness. The effects of Maui's good deeds immediately appeared. The villagers could lead more productive and happy lives. They could plan for their days, do more things, and never had to be afraid of the night again. After the creation of new islands, this new exploit had gained Maui the respect and affection of many, and he liked it, so he decided to do more for them. The world was still far from perfect. Another problem was that the sky was very low back then. It was like an invisible ceiling that you could reach by climbing a tree. In some higher parts of the islands that emerged from the infinite sea around them, it was impossible to stand up, and people had to walk on their hands and knees. This made fishing, hunting, planting and harvesting a constant struggle. And even worse, the sky was slowly falling. What would happen when it would reach the earth and room for mankind would have entirely disappeared? Maui felt sad for the earthlings, and he wanted to help. So he set out to move this falling sky. This time, no one could have used force to revert the sky's fall. It was just too large and too heavy. But what physical strength couldn't do, spiritual energy might be able to achieve. Maui's father was an expert in this field, and Maui sought his help. They sat down, facing each other, and they combined their spiritual strength, lifting their spirits to the sky and pushing as strong as they could. The sky was so imposing that it didn't move at first. But they kept trying, and their combined energy began to work. There was a huge noise. The wind began to blow and shake every tree on earth as people ran around, terrified. The earth trembled, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. The sky began to move up and up and up, so high that no human being would never reach it again, even the birds. People who were walking on their knees could stand upright. The top of the trees that previously touched the sky could suddenly soar with majesty. And as the noise of the sky moving up faded away, it was replaced with the cheering sounds of people and the happy chirping of birds who could now fly freely. The world had been saved and expanded beyond human imagination, all thanks to Maui. In this new, expanded and freer world, birds sang and flied more than ever. But people didn't know it. At the time, birds were invisible. People could hear them as they populated the trees. Sometimes they could feel the wind made by their wings, but no one had ever seen a bird, except Maui. One of his powers was the ability to see birds, and he not only delighted in their melodious music, he also liked to observe their colors and their variety of shapes. But no one could join him in enjoying this vision, and this made Maui aware of the limitations of human condition. Even though there were now more islands, day and night were regular, and people had more room to live. Human life remained spiritually and materially very limited. And so he thought about giving more to his human friends that he felt compassion for. He prepared a spell that would bless every human and give them the ability to see birds, and beyond, a chance to realize that there was more to the world than the visible, that beauty could be within the reach of anyone who was able to see beyond appearances. The spell worked, and since then we can see birds, and through this vision we get a clue, an invitation to elevate ourselves in many possible senses of the term, aesthetically, sentimentally, spiritually. Maui had now acquired more wisdom and had grown a lot after all these good deeds. And he thought of yet another gift that would immensely benefit humanity. Men had not yet mastered the secret of fire. They sometimes had fire that they found when they could collect embers of natural fires, or when a volcano erupted, but they didn't know how to create it, and so they often lost the flames when it rained, or when someone forgot to feed them. When this happened, they had to walk or hike on dozens of miles to find another source of fire, and they lived in constant fear of losing the precious source of light and heat. The secret of fire was unknown to men, but not to everyone. There was a tribe of intelligent birds who knew how to create it, and their chief was a mud hen, a bird looking a bit like a duck. Mud hens appeared in the winter and flew to another part of the world in the summer. But this bird was not a regular one. Like Maui, it was a half-divine creature that had taken this appearance, and it had more power and knowledge than most creatures. Maui had acquired more strength and will than any other, save for the gods, and he traveled to the place where the tribe of birds lived, with the intention to confront their leader and get the secret of creating fire. When he found the tribe and asked to talk to their chief, the creature refused to reveal the secret. So Maui began to strangle it. The bird knew that the secret to creating fire was rubbing two sticks together. But this secret was very precious, and it didn't want to let it spread. So it deliberately directed Maui to rub the wrong sticks together, and tried to convince him that it didn't work only because he was not gifted enough. Maui didn't believe it and grew angry at the mud hen's deceit. So he strangled with more intensity, and the bird finally submitted and told Maui to use 2 sticks of kiawe wood, which was the right type of wood. It worked, and the secret was finally revealed. But Maui decided to punish the bird for its deceitful behavior. So he rubbed the head and the neck of the bird with a flaming stick. This left the mud hen and its lineage with a bald head, and to this day their bald heads remind us of the bird's reluctance to reveal the secrets of fire. Maui shared the secret with humanity, and again improved our condition. Maui had accomplished great deeds and become benevolent, but his natural arrogance had not disappeared. It had even grown after such impressive exploits. And this arrogance was the cause that led to his demise. Maui was now revered and as close to a god as a demigod could be. But he was still mortal, and he couldn't ignore that with the passing of time, his body was aging. He became obsessed and repulsed by the idea of death, and so he became interested in ways to find immortality for himself and for mankind. But how could mortals achieve immortality? Life and death were under the guard of goddess Hine, the guardian of life. Hine was the guardian of the underworld. She decided when a life had to end, and the mere thought of death from her was enough to kill any living creature. The only option was to kill Hine, to kill death itself, so that every living being could be freed from her tyranny. But this looked very difficult. How to approach and kill a goddess that could kill you with a single look or a single thought? Maui planned to approach her when she would be asleep. He would become immaterial and enter her body, then steal her heart while exiting, which would kill her. But he needed help, allies, to stand guard while he would approach Hine in her sleep. So he told his brothers of his plan and asked them for help. He would turn them into birds. They would sing to Hine to make her fall asleep, and they would keep an eye on the goddess while she slept and while Maui approached. The plan was audacious, and the brothers were terrified at the idea of approaching the guardian of life and defying the order of things. What could be their punishment if they were caught? But he managed to convince them, and so it was done. As the goddess fell asleep, Maui became immaterial and approached her, entering her body as a spirit. But before he could steal her heart, one of the birds realized that defying the laws of nature was the greatest crime possible, even for a demigod, and he betrayed his brother. He emitted a loud sound that woke the goddess up. As soon as Hine came back from the land of sleep, Maui, who was still inside her body, was killed. The greatest hero ever had fallen, and lost what time he had left to live in his quest for immortality. This happened long before the time of Maui, when the world was still young, and only a handful of primal gods lived in it. Two of them, the Sky Father, Rangi, and the Earth Mother, Papa, married and formed a tight union. An union so strong that they lived locked together in a tight embrace, and between them, between sky and earth, only a very small and dark space could exist. They had children, over 70 children, all gods like their parents. But their children could only live in the cramped darkness between them, while the Sky Father and the Earth Mother stayed entirely absorbed in their mutual love, oblivious of anything else around or between them. Even though they had little space and only knew darkness, the children grew and started to discuss among themselves what it could be like to live in the light. The fiercest of the children was Tumatawenga, the god of war and hunting. Following his impulsive nature, he proposed that the best solution to their predicament was to kill their parents, to get free from them. But his brother Tane disagreed. Tane was the god of forests and birds, and he was more inspired by harmony and survival. He suggested that it would be better to push them apart. Rangi, the sky, would become a stranger to them and be placed above their heads, whereas Papa, the earth, who lied under Rangi, would remain below to nurture them. Other gods agreed with Tane and put his plan into action. The god of cultivated food, Rongo, the god of the sea, Tangaroa, the god of wild food, Auniatikeke, they all stood up and tried to push up Rangi with their hands. But the Sky Father would not budge, nor even notice the effort of his children, absorbed as he was in his love of Papa and her sweet embrace. And their children didn't have enough strength to separate their parents. After many attempts, Tane, the god of forests, had an idea. Instead of standing upright and pushing with his hands, he lied on his back and pushed with his strong legs. He pushed and pushed until suddenly a ray of light crossed the darkness. In a deafening noise, Rangi and Papa began to drift apart. The unexpected separation had taken them by surprise, and they cried of grief and pain as the world between them filled with light and their children discovered its beauty. From the breaking of this primal love, the separation of sky and earth, our world appeared, And for the first time, the gods had space to move, fly, and breathe as much as they wanted. Their joy contrasted with the despair and cries of their parents, and Rangi started crying, sending abundant rain to the body of his wife, the earth. The gods were too happy about their liberation to notice the pain of their parents, except one, Tawiri Matea, the god of storms and winds. He was angered that their parents had been torn apart and couldn't stand hearing their desperate cries. All knew that what had been done could not be undone, but Tawiri Matea pledged that from this moment on, they would all have to deal with his anger. He left his siblings on earth and flew off to the sky to join Rangi and prepare his attack. And so in this new world, before the first day even ended, war had appeared. A war between gods that would rage in heaven and on earth. In the sky, Tawiri Matea fathered an army of children, many winds, clouds, including whirlwinds, gloomy thick clouds, hurricane clouds, and thunderstorm clouds, and rain, and mist, and fog. He launched his first attack against the one god guilty of the separation of Rangi and Papa, Tane, the god of forests. The forests of the world were taken in storms, and as dust flied everywhere, even the great forest trees of Tane were smashed and fell to the ground. Then Tawiri Matea turned his anger to Tangaroa, the god of the seas. Huge waves rose, whirlpools formed, and Tangaroa fled in panic. While the god of storms prepared his attack and fathered ever more children, so did the other gods who lived on earth. And Tangaroa had had 2 grandchildren, Ikatere, the father of fish, and Tuteweiwei, the ancestor of reptiles. Both were terrified by the attack of the storm god, and so Ikatere and his creations, fish, found shelter under the sea. But reptiles instead escaped to the forest, to the realm of Tane, abandoning their ancestor, the god of the sea. Tane and Tangaroa had cordial relations until this point, but Tangaroa was angry that his brother gave refuge to his runaway children, the reptiles, and their relations soared. Since then, Tane of the forest supplies men with canoes, nets, and fish hooks to catch the descendants of Tangaroa living underwater. And Tangaroa retaliates by swamping canoes and sweeping away houses, land, and trees that are washed out to sea in floods. This eternal conflict between the two, that still rages on to this day, began during the first war of all times. But this is not the only conflict that was born in these times. Tawiri Matea, who had already weakened Tane of the forest and Tangaroa of the sea, turned his attention to other gods, the gods of food, both cultivated and wild, and also Tu, the father of humankind. the gods were starting to organize to withstand his attacks. And when came the turn of Tu, the father of humans, the god was able to resist and repel the fury of the winds and clouds. The anger of the gods subsided, and the world began to find a new balance, began to return to peace. But this peace is never entirely guaranteed. The feud of storms, forests, and sea continues to happen, and humankind has an active part in it, like trees, fish, or reptiles. The father of humans, too, thought about the actions of other gods in separating their parents, and their cowardice when they went into hiding during the attacks of Tawirimatea. And so the descendants of Tu, humans, keep repaying the other gods for their flaws. They capture the birds, the children of Tane, and they use forests as building materials or fuel. They capture fish under the waters of Tangaroa. They eat food and use wild plants to weave baskets or build their roofs. So Tu eats a little bit of all his brothers to repay them for their past actions, and he subdued each of them using his descendants, the men. The only one he could never subdue is Tawirimatea, and for this reason, storms and hurricanes keep attacking mankind to this day. And so appeared our world, one of beauty, land, sea, where ancient conflicts continue between the gods, and beyond them, the primal elements they represent. And since then, all gods were freed from the embrace of earth and sky. All except one. There was one last child of Rangi and Papa, who was never born, and still lives inside Papa, underground. Whenever this child is kicking, the earth shakes, and this is what causes an earthquake. His name is Ruaumoko, and he is the god of earthquakes and volcanoes. Separated forever, Rangi and Papa continue to grieve for each other. When it rains, it is Rangi's tears that fall towards Papa. At night, when the sky appears illuminated by countless stars, these are lights that Tane threw, along with the sun and the moon, to appropriately dress his father. And through a long and conflictual genealogy, we are all the descendants of Tu, the son of Rangi and Papa. The earth and the sky are our ancestors. Before the world began, there was a primordial abyss filled with water, and this abyss had no limits. It extended infinitely in every direction. It had no bottom. But no one could have witnessed this, because it was before life appeared. The qualities of this primordial water were represented by a set of 8 gods, 4 male and 4 female, forming couples. Nu and his female counterpart, Naunet, were the water itself. He and Hauhet were the water's infinite extent. Kek and Kauket were the darkness within it. Amen and Amaunet were its hidden and unknowable nature. Together they formed the octoed, or eightfold, and the males were represented with frog heads, whereas females were represented with the heads of snakes. One day, the two groups of male and female deities converged, and their encounter resulted in a great upheaval. A mound, shaped as a pyramid, emerged from the waters. From it emerged the sun, which rose into the sky, and for the first time this world in creation received light. All other gods and living beings also emerged from the primordial energy liberated by the encounter of the eight gods. I told you this origin story is the oldest that we know of. It is referred to in the pyramid texts, which are the oldest ancient Egyptian funerary texts that we know of. They are dated from the Old Kingdom, and they were carved onto the walls of pyramids and sarcophagi from the 24th century BC, some 45 centuries ago. But this origin story was not the only one. In Heliopolis, near the delta of the Nile, the creation was attributed to Atum, a deity that existed in the waters of this abyss of Nu, as an inert potential being. For eons, Atum was just a thought, a potential waiting to happen. But one day, he began to form, and the mound, the primordial pyramid, emerged from the waters. Atum was self-engendered, the first and last god to have this power, and he could change aspects and separate them from himself, creating new elements. First, he gave rise to Shu, the air god, and his sister, Tefnut. Tefnut was the void among the waters where the world would form. Shu and Tefnut coupled and produced two children, the earth god, Geb, and the sky goddess, Nut. Together, the siblings that represented the earth and the sky defined the limits of the world. Geb and Nut together gave rise to 4 children, the forces of life. Osiris, the god of fertility and regeneration. Isis, goddess of motherhood. Set, the god of chaos. And Nephthys, the female complement of Set. As you understand it, this was a possible prequel to the Osiris myth that I told you earlier, with the rivalry of Osiris and Set. So, in total, the primordial being, Atum, had 2 children, the air and the void. Together they had 2 more, the earth and the sky, who had 4 children, the components of life. This makes a total of 9 gods, 9 deities that are collectively called the Ennead and were worshipped in Heliopolis. In this theology, Atum was often represented as the sun, and the 8 other gods were as much individual gods as they were different aspects of Atum. Not far from Heliopolis was Memphis, a city that remained important throughout ancient Egyptian history and was the capital during the Old Kingdom. The most important deity worshipped in Memphis was Ptah, the patron god of craftsmen. Ptah represented the ability to envision a product and shape raw materials to create it. And the theology developed in Memphis saw the creation of the world as an intellectual act rather than a physical phenomenon. It also starts with the same watery abyss. And in this abyss, Nu, existed the force represented by Ptah, the force to envision and assemble, to create new elements and new beings. So Atum, the primordial being of the Ennead that we just discussed, did not self-engender in this theology. It was created by the thought of Ptah. And it became real when Ptah said his name by the power of the word. By speaking names for his ideas, Ptah produced the gods and all other things. He was the true creator of the world. I told you earlier that Thebes became the capital of unified Egypt in the New Kingdom. And with the preeminence of Thebes, its local god, Amun, became the supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon. So, unsurprisingly, the narrative that developed in Thebes made Amun the transcendent deity, the one responsible for the creation of the world. We have reached the end of our journey for tonight. I will now leave you in the company of the sweet sounds of our camp on the Nile's bank. I'll be back soon for another story. And in the meantime, sleep well. Sweet dreams. Au revoir.